Hello and welcome to a conversation with Lin-Manuel Miranda. I'm Cameron Bailey and I'm the artistic director and head here at TIFF. As you join us today, I want to encourage you to take a moment to reflect on the land that we're on and who its traditional keepers are. Here in Toronto, I'm located on the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit and the traditional territory of the Anishinaabeg, the Wendat, and the Haudenosaunee. This territory is within the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, and it's home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We're grateful to be working on this land and to be presenting the stories of Indigenous creators. I want to thank our members and donors who make this event and everything we do possible. You help transform the way people see the world through film, and we could not do this without your year-round support. And if you're interested in supporting TIFF, including through our Share Her Journey and Every Story campaigns, you can do that by visiting tiff.net/support. I also want to extend a sincere thank you to our lead sponsor, Bell, and our major sponsors, RBC, L'Oreal Paris, and Visa, and the support we get from government bodies, including the Government of Canada, the Government of Ontario, and the City of Toronto. This December, we are presenting through TIFF Cinematheque musicals, the movies that moved us at TIFF Bell Lightbox. And this is a series of vibrant, joyous movie musicals that transport us to worlds where life's deepest emotions find voice in song. It's our first ever series of classic musicals, and it offers some of the most loved, most acclaimed films of the genre, from Hollywood to Bollywood, Jamaica to France. These are the movies that I think we go back to again and again. I hope you can join us in person over the coming month and watch how directors like Stanley Donen, Vincent Minnelli, Farah Khan, Jacques Demy, Ken Russell, Mani Ratnam, and more find the delights of movie musicals and turn those to their own particular passions. So whether you know the words to every song in the movies we're showing, or you're discovering these classics for the very first time, there's no denying the show-stopping pleasure of the genre. And you can get more information on musicals, the movies that moved us, at tiff.net. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our special guest, Pulitzer Prize, Grammy, Emmy, and Tony Award-winning songwriter, actor, director, and producer, Lin-Manuel Miranda. He's the creator and original star of Broadway's Hamilton and In the Heights, and the recipient of the 2015 MacArthur Foundation Award, also known as the Genius Grant, and the 2018 Kennedy Center Honors. His upcoming works include Encanto for Disney, for which he wrote the music, and his own debut as a film director, Tick, Tick, Boom. We can't think of a better guest to talk to about musicals on the big screen. Lin-Manuel Miranda, welcome. It is an honor to be speaking with you, and I want to begin with talking about energy. Everything I've seen you do has a kind of a vitality and exuberance, a kind of full-on engagement with life, and it feels like that may have been a point of connection with Jonathan Larson's work, and I wonder if that was it, or what was the moment that really plugged you into what he was doing?
Oh, sure. Well, listen, I cast myself back to my 17th birthday when I first saw Rent in the back row of the mezzanine of the Nederlander Theater. And there were several things going on with that first work I was exposed to, Rent. It was the most contemporary musical I'd ever seen. There are a lot of great New York contemporary musicals, but A Chorus Line is a period piece by 1997. West Side Story is a period piece by 1997. So it was the first one that had music that sounded like the music I listened to on the radio. Jonathan really had this sort of side mission that like popular music and theater music should be friends and should be in conversation with larger culture and not siloed off into its own world. And I felt the full force of that with the energy as you mentioned. It was the most diverse cast I'd ever seen in a Broadway show in my life. So I felt seen. I felt like I'm seeing what New York really looks like on this stage. I also, and then, all I wanted when I was a kid was to make movies and write songs. And the main characters were a filmmaker and a songwriter. I mean, it could not have been more like tailored to like, oh, this is what you want to do. Like, this is about a community trying to like stay alive amidst gentrification and the AIDS crisis and all the things that are really facing New York right now. And I knew I wanted a life as an artist. This felt like a glimpse of what that looks like and some of the struggles that they face. You know, the fact that there was like a chorus of like homeless people like singing, and that their lives remain unchanged throughout, like, was incredibly impactful to me. Like, I just felt like truly contemporary and truly like reflective of the city I live in and was navigating as a teenager. And I never saw a musical that felt so homemade.
Okay.
You know what I mean? It just felt like there's Bustelo references and Sondheim and Kurosawa, who is my favorite filmmaker, even at 17. And I was just like, I couldn't believe this was all in a musical. And I think that's what allowed me to make the leap to think I could write one. Huh. You know, I always admired musicals, but they were written by other people. It sometimes feels like a very inaccessible art form, like opera or ballet. It's by other people that rich people like experience, and this felt made by us for us. And so yeah, that was like sort of made the switch in my head.
Mm-hmm. Well, I love that Kurosawa was your favorite filmmaker at age 17. That's the kind of,
it's still my favorite role.
But also that, you know, you musicals can sometimes appear maybe to the people outside of the form like they're about fantasy. It's not real. And what I'm hearing from you is that Larson was very much absorbing all of the real life influences of contemporary New York at the time. And that's certainly something I've seen in your work as well, whether they are period pieces, whether they're candy colored or not. There's a real sense of what's happening right now, a kind of social realism inside of that.
Yeah, I also think, you know, I down a deep dive of Jonathan Larson when I sort of fell in love with Rent, and I knew that was very deliberate on his part of, like, you know, popular music and theater music used to be friends. And I think my first attempts at writing musical theater were advancing Jonathan Larson's thesis. And I brought the music from my corner of the world with my first attempt. Within the Heights, I'm bringing the Latin music I grew up with. I'm bringing the hip hop music I grew up with. And you know, it's like a very direct line of like, oh, a neighborhood facing gentrification and other issues, like, and a community trying to hold on to itself. Like, it really was, especially that first draft, was very influenced by Rent. And my early attempts at musical theater all sounded like Jonathan Larson knockoffs. And it wasn't until I finally kind of pulled from the music that was in my bloodstream that I started to find my own voice. But it was still with the thought of, you know, I have this draft of my Jonathan Larson grant letter that, you know, I didn't win. I'm a Jonathan Grant loser. I'm a Larson Grant loser. But I wrote very consciously about sort of like what Jonathan was trying to do is something I'm also interested in. I believe that, you know, good storytelling and good music is good storytelling and good music. And it doesn't matter what the source is. You know, I think the best musicals really infuse the real world into their work, and you recognize something of your life in them.
You talked a little bit before about the kind of music that Larson was drawing on. And when I was watching Tick, Tick, Boom, I was hearing prog rock and punk and ska and some other elements as well. And that's not music that I'd heard much of in your own work that you'd written yourself. So was it, I mean, is this a music, these terrain that were unfamiliar to you, or that you had to kind of enter to bring them to life on screen? Is there a different cadence or rhythm that comes to performing or shooting that kind of musical language as opposed to hip hop or Latin music?
It's a great question. You know, I think that it's funny. I'm a child of the 80s. When Jonathan was turning 30, I was turning 10. And so for me, you know, I was familiar with all of these influences that Jonathan was drawing on because I have an older sister, and, you know, to have an older siblings to have cooler tasted music than you should have.
I have an older sister too. It made all the difference. I saw all her records.
So it was so fun to have those conversations about, because I also think that the score of Tick, Tick, Boom is very much the portrait of an artist as a young man. And you can really hear his influences sort of in less mixed form than what would emerge in Rent. Like I listen to No More, and certainly you hear Rent, the Rent that is to come, but I really hear the B-52s in there, and, Lake A ceilings. Like we really like talked about like how B-52s could inform Robin's performance. In the visuals of that, I really looked at 80s and 90s music video iconography. Like his floating head in there is me, like my nod to like the Fine Young Cannibals video. She drives me crazy. Yeah. I was like, we could do some like Fine Young Cannibals floating head. My sister was in love with that guy. I mean, he was such a dreamboat. Yeah. So like Robin's floating head, but his head in that video is very much, it was also playing a little bit with like the Wizard of Ozness of like the black and white of the dinginess and then like the color of the apartment. So I thought like floating head of Oz would be really nice. So what's the 80s version of the floating head of Oz? And it's Fine Young Cannibals, She Drives Me Crazy video. I mean, we really in terms, and then of course, like in Play Game, I mean, that is me getting to direct the 1990 hip hop video I always wanted to direct. And there's so much fun to be had with those images I grew up with, to the point where like it became a running joke among the cast. Like Tariq would be like, "Hey, Lin, it's great that you have me here working for 5 days on this 1 minute and 30-second song." Like you're really getting a lot of coverage for this like very short interlude in your movie. But I had so much fun, like to have the Fly Girls dancing and to like create the fake movie poster, the fake theater posters in the back to sort of, which were all written by Stephen Levinson, British mega musical, the musical, Gypsy again, white people arguing about marriage. That was just enormous fun to put together because that song reflects Jonathan's ambivalence about the world he wants to be a part of. And we got to kind of take the piss out of everything going on in theater at that time in like that late 80s period.
I want to ask you about casting Andrew Garfield, who I've often seen play much more inward-looking roles, much more kind of introverted characters than he does here. There's a dazzling energy that he has, which I think matches Larson, matches your own aesthetic maybe as well. How did you come to the decision to cast him, especially when I understand he has never sung professionally on screen? Is that right?
Yeah, it's funny you say that about his inward-looking roles. I think Andrew Garfield is often called upon to suffer beautifully because he maybe suffers more beautifully than any other actor. You see him cry and you cry. Like he has that gift. And it's a beautiful thing. But that's why seeing him in Angels in America, where I saw him in Angels at the National before it came to Broadway, was such a revelation to me because that role, well, it's a masterpiece of a play and it's 8 hours long. And that role calls on your everything. And he gave it everything. And like, if you read Pryor's lines in a monotone for 8 hours, it would be a feat of endurance. But he gave it, it was just like his rib cage was cracked open for 8 hours. And I had never seen that side of him. I just was like, and I left the theater being like, that guy can do anything. And if he can carry a tune even a little bit, he'll get his way to the rest. I could not have been more surprised at how incredible his vocals would be. But, he just said, I need time and, I need the time to get there. And we had time. And so, to watch him, I workshopped this like I was workshopping a musical. I did a series of readings over the course of 2 years before we, started production. And at that first one, he had never sung before. And you could tell he was burning to try it, but he was intimidated because I surrounded him with all these like musical theater folks who sing like it's nothing. And so I said on the lunch of the first day, I said, let's just circle 3 moments where you get it out. And so you'll sing Boho Days, which has no musical accompaniment. You don't have to worry about being on key or off key. It's a cappella. And like you can sing Sunday because it's a big choir moment and like no one is going to hear you. Like just literally to like begin to draw him out of whoever put that valve on him whenever he was young, because it was such an unexplored part of him, which was almost better. It wasn't like I was dealing with someone who thinks they can sing and they can't. I was dealing with an actor with no bad habits. It was like a shiny new instrument. And he worked incredibly with vocal guru Liz Kaplan. Coach sounds like you're teaching someone place, like that's not what she does. She kind of is very holistic and uncovers what's blocking you singing to your fullest potential. She's really a voice whisperer. And it was amazing to watch his growth over that year and a half of just working on the script and coming in every so often and reading it.
This sounds like this would give him some new tools as a screen actor, no matter what he does next, whether he's singing or not.
Yeah, and at that first meeting, he said, I asked, do you sing? And he said, I've always wanted to explore that part of me. I've never had really the opportunity to. And I was like, this is the opportunity to, like, you do that. It's a little like going from 0 to 10K. But he trained and he did it beautifully.
I want to maybe expand it beyond your working with Andrew to your entire team on the film and in films generally. You've had this remarkable evolution as a writer, composer, performer, producer, director, filmmaker, and everything that I've read, you're famous for your dedication to the detail of your craft. And I wonder, how do you reach a common ground with your collaborators? Where do you set the bar when you're on set or even before you get to set?
Oh, well, listen, I have really good role models. This is my first foray as a director, but the directors I've been lucky enough to work with and continue to work with really create a world where it's playtime and the best idea in the room wins. I think that's so important, whether it's in a musical or even in the animated space, like when you're working with hundreds of departments, to create a situation where the best idea in the room wins is amazing. Like, my closest collaborator is Tommy Kail. I've been working with him on what will be 20 years starting next year. And I don't think we've ever raised our voices to each other once. That's not, even when there's been pressure-filled moments, we just talk and talk until we're making the same thing. And we figure out how far apart we are on something, and we talk our way to facing the same direction again. So that's an incredible role model to have, and someone who also takes it upon himself to kind of find a private language with every actor and go, what does that actor need? Some actors are more technical, some more actors are more intuitive, and like finding that personal, like, what do I need to give you the space to go where you need to go? I had an incredible collaborative team. I also stole folks that I saw worked really well. Like Alice Brooks was so incredible. Her work on In the Heights was so incredible. I was thrilled to get to work with her on Tick, Tick, Boom. And, and that exact degree of transparency and just honesty and like getting to the same idea and talking until you're making the same thing, which is an idea that goes back to George Abbott and was continued through Hal Prince and I think continues through Tommy Kail, was also shared by my producer, Julie O, who, this movie was her idea. She saw me in this show in 2014. She went about getting the film rights herself and then emailed me. And I went, yes, I'm the only one who can make this movie. And so, I think I've talked before in interviews about how it's so much, I find it so much harder in Hollywood to have the transparency of decision-making that I've experienced in the theater. When we did Hamilton, it was us and our producer in the room. We go, okay, let's see where this piece is. I think we need one more reading. Let's do one more reading. Or I think we're ready for a production. Let's go talk to, producing entities. And then we would do it. That sounds incredibly simple, right? But it seems to be much harder in Hollywood because there's just more levers and pulleys and systems and invisible systems that you're not even aware of. But with Julie, I was able to have such, and also like Brian and Ron at Imagine, it was such a simple transaction. It was sort of like, let's get the piece in the best shape possible. Let's find a partner. We found a partner in Netflix, and then we proceed from there. And it just was like, it felt as simple to go from film rights to green light as it has like in my best experiences in the theater, where it was like everyone who needs to be in the room is making the decision together, and then we go execute it. And it's amazing how hard it is to just find that simple transaction, but it is. There's just so many cooks sometimes, and it was very clear for us.
We are, at the moment that we have Tick, Tick, Boom in TIFF Bell Lightbox in Toronto playing on the big screen, we're also about to launch a series of classic musicals. And these are from Hollywood to Bollywood, Brazil, France, Jamaica, everywhere, global. And I wanted to just ask you if you'll, indulge me for a few moments about some of your favorite musicals and just what you think is the thing that really just kicks in it. And I know that the first one I'm going to ask you about is one that I've read means a lot to you, and that's Singing in the Rain.
Yeah, well, Singing in the Rain is the best musical because it is, and it's because, first of all, it's really about something. There are more fantastic musicals, more elaborate musical numbers, but this is really about kind of a pivotal moment in the history of the art form of film, and what generation of actors who've been doing it one way have to do to avoid obsolescence. So it's actually about a real thing, and the sheer variety of numbers in it too is just stunning. Like a movie that has like a ballet sequence with Debbie Reynolds, and also has Make 'Em Laugh, and also has Moses Supposes, and Singing in the Rain, which is, the abandon with which, he attacks those puddles after you see how incredibly detailed and precise he can be. And then he starts it really is like, like the arm hair on is like standing up, because it makes me want to cry how beautiful that transition is, to go from this incredibly precise dancing to just fucking jumping in puddles for joy. And then he sees the cop. It's just like, it's a beautiful love story. It's really about something. It has an incredible variety of musical numbers. And and it's just also just like blazing talent in every frame.
All right. Sound of Music.
Sound of Music. So this is one of the, I have no objective distance from it because it's one of my father's favorite movies. And so it was just on. It was just the soundtrack. I've grown to appreciate things about it that went over my head. Like, you don't clock the Nazis when you're 3 years old. You just clock these kids in clothes made of drapes, and how much your dad longs for a family that would burst into song like the one that's on the screen. In fact, when we went on, my wife has Austrian ancestry. And so we went on a big family trip, and my dad rented the Sound of Music bus, rented a camera crew, and made us sing Do Re Mi. Oh, it's on YouTube. Made us sing Do Re Mi in all the spots where they filmed the movie that are still around. And so, I mean, that's how special that is but really that one is like my father's movie. Like, there's something in that captured some yearning in him.
Okay, I'm going to ask you about just two more. I don't know how much you watch from India, but there's a movie called Om Shanti Om, which is a giant Bollywood musical. Have you?
I haven't, and I'm really sorry to say that Bollywood musicals are a real cultural blind spot for me that I have to catch up on, because I know I'm missing great
There's
stuff.
Amazing work. I mean, choreography, set design, everything. But I would recommend that. That's in our series.
And then that's on the Christmas break. That's
great. The last one I'll ask you about, because I feel like it has a relevance for Tick, Tick, Boom, is All That Jazz.
Yeah. Well, listen, part of my prep was getting to make 8 mini movies about Bob Fosse and Gwen Verdon with the Fosse Verdon series, and watching Tommy wrestle with the creative process of a director that could not be more different than Tommy Kail. Womanizing, drug popping, Tommy is like the anti Bob Fosse, and to watch the tension of him wrestling with how to tell this story in and the collaboration with Gwen and how much work came out of that. But All That Jazz, and Tick, Tick, Boom are very much in conversation. Particularly that last scene. I think that there is this, there's this like amazing cocktail of like cynicism and hope and fatalism and showmanship in Fosse's work, that just compared to what he was coming out of was like so modern and felt so contemporary. It's thrilling. I mean, the opening sequence of All That Jazz is a chorus line in 5 minutes. You know what I mean? Like, it is, and he doesn't let himself off the hook either. If Roy Scheider's character is a thinly veiled Bob Fosse, like, he's got those dancers like talking just as much shit as they praise him. Like, it's really if it's a semi-autobiographical biopic, it's a very warts and all biopic, and it ends with him in a body bag. Like, it's so real. And so, it was, I cameoed as Roy Scheider on the Fosse Verdon documentary, and that was Tommy's little sort of love note cameo to me. I had to lose a lot of weight to fit into that sequined shirt. But yeah, I mean, Fosse's the gold standard when it comes to adapting stage work to the screen. Between All That Jazz and Cabaret, like, he did it better than anyone who's ever done it. And it's because he really somehow, like a prodigy, knew how to use the medium of film to sort of sharpen the storytelling, like undercut the musical theater numbers. Like, he brought 50 more dimensions to it. It was like he was able to think in 3D when he thought filmmaking. He was just a really incredible filmmaker on his own terms. And so to me, Fosse is like the standard of the musical filmmaker worth chasing.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that. I haven't seen All That Jazz in a few years now. It's really made me want to go back to it as soon as I can. Last thing I want to ask you, and I guess it comes from what you were saying about Fosse. Cinema has a kind of a plasticity that is different than how theater works, and you've done both, and they're doing great work in both. And I'm interested in how, like, what kind of a playground movies are for you now. That you've done so much in theater, you've done so much in movies, but the kind of the way that you can transform the world around us when it's viewed through a subjective lens in movies, that brilliant diner shot in Tick, Tick, Boom when the wall goes down, all of these different elements that really show you how the world can be so mutable in film. And I wonder if there are things that you're still dying to do in movies that are maybe a little bit different than what you can do on the stage.
Yeah, well, I had the most first of all, my big hero, my two heroes growing up were Jonathan Larson and Robert Rodriguez, because Robert Rodriguez did it himself. He like did those labs, maxed out his credit cards, and made his first movie for $8,000, and like made his Hollywood calling card by himself, like in Mexico. And he had a book called Rebel Without a Crew that came out when I was a teenager. And it was it was just so inspiring of like, the things you're going to learn in film school, you can learn in a few weeks. Like, you have to just start making stuff. And that has very much been my ethos, even in the theater space, because of that book. And I had the good fortune to sit down with him for lunch a few years ago before I started production on Tick, Tick. And the thing he said to me that was so empowering was, you're not starting from scratch by transitioning from theater to film. Like, everything you learned about storytelling in your genre applies to film. It's just different tools. And if you think of it that way, then like you actually have all the answers, because you know this world, you know this character, you'll learn the lenses fast. And you do, you learn the lenses fast. And, everything else is you have to actually bring your craft over. And that was really empowering, particularly when it came to creating the layout of each musical sequence. Because I think the thing I learned the most from writing Hamilton was two things. I learned about time and how musicals can dilate or compress time better than anything else. Like there are songs in Hamilton that like compress 50 years, and there are songs in Hamilton that explode a nanosecond into a 4-minute monologue. And that's one of the most exciting things about it. And two, I learned something beyond the truism that you get in musical theater school, which I never attended. I never did one of those workshops, which is that, the truism is that you have to, in your opening number, establish the rules with the audience of how this musical works, how things are sung, and that is all true. Your opening number is your most important number in terms of establishing the relationship with the audience. But there's not enough talk about how every song is an opportunity to renegotiate those rules and expand those boundaries and interrogate those boundaries. And so, our opening number in Hamilton sets it pretty well. Like, we're all telling the story. Whichever narrator is closest to the story gets to tell the story. And then we put on our coats and we specify who we are. But then 6 songs later, like in Helpless Satisfied, we go, we reserve the right to rewind if we need to and go from a different perspective. And so, again, just the notion that every song can expand what this contract is was something I really brought to Tick, Tick, Boom consciously. So the opening number is my thesis. As soon as his hands touch the keys, we are in the world according to Jonathan Larson. And he will be singing practically from on stage to you, doing this on-stage monologue, but we reserve the right to go inside his head. And in Jonathan's head, sometimes the Strand bookstore will burst into song. And sometimes he will see life a little more musically than perhaps you would see it. And then continuing to explode that notion in all the different ways, whether it's the Sunday sequence, whether it's play game and how he sounds in his head as a rapper, which is more like Black Thought than how he actually sounds on that stage with a sideways pink hat, and to therapy, where we actually kind of cut between the inspiration for the song and the song that results. So using every song to expand the relationship gently, I think makes for a really exciting evening, because it's not the same way every time. It's, it can be like this. Oh, it can be like this.
That must make the editing process in film really kind of fascinating for you, I would imagine, because that's also where you get to play with time.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I've had the privilege to be on several film sets, and I knew what kind of film set I wanted to cultivate and what kind of energy I wanted to cultivate. Editing is what I knew the least about. I have not been in that many editing rooms, or not for extended periods of time. And it was the most analogous to the songwriting process. When I'm building an evening for you, I'm writing a Hamilton or In the Heights for you. What are my tools? They're tension, release, compression, surprise, rise and fall of action. I always think of it as I'm trying to make you the best 90-minute mixtape. That's always how I think of it,
I love that.
It's more analogous in theater because there's an act break and you flip the tape. But it's what is the arc of your evening, and you're playing with all of those same elements with editing. It's just not 12 tones on a keyboard. It's the incredibly talented Myron Kirstein or Andy Weisblum at the controls. But we're playing with the same things that we would be if we were building a score.
Thank you so much, man. This has been an amazing conversation. I've learned so much.
These are great questions. It's great to dig deeper into all this stuff.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for Tick, Tick, Boom. Thank you for the masterpiece that is Hamilton. And for talking about the old musicals as well. I love it. And
we could do an hour on the bandwagon. I mean, if you want to get into old musicals, I'm your guy.
We have to do a volume 2 of musicals. We got some great ones, Black Orpheus and many others as well. But I feel like there's just so many more we got to do. So really appreciate you.
I would just say that, I'm so thrilled by the fact that there's so many musicals this year, but that they're so different. I think that's what makes an art form healthy. Annette could not be more different than In the Heights, could not be more different than Everybody's Talking About Jamie, could not be more different from Tick, Tick, Boom. And as long as we continue to show the world that musicals aren't just one thing, I think the art form is healthy.
Yes.
And I'm really encouraged by the musicals I've seen, and I'm a fan of a lot of them.
Oh, that's great. Look, can I ask just one final thing?
Yeah.
Total coincidence that all of these movie musicals are coming out at the same time. But it hits a moment when we are, I hope, recovering and coming out of a pandemic and the dark days of lockdown. What do you think your movie and these other musicals are doing for us right now?
I don't know. I mean, yeah, I've seen a lot of think pieces, whether we're in the new 1930s, you know, like coming out of the Depression and needing musical escapism. I don't know, because I don't think of Tick, Tick, Boom as escapism at all. There's certainly moments of escape, but more than anything, I wanted you to have the feeling I had when I saw Tick, Tick, Boom at 21 years old, which like, ugh, what am I doing with my life? You know, what am I really going to embark on this creative journey? Or am I going to find another way to pay my rent? And you know, it asks the tough question of what are you doing with your time? That's always the toughest question. And so, but you know, that being said, like, I'm not sure. Like, I wasn't around in the 30s. I know that there was a lot of great art that came out of that post-Depression period, and I know that what's exciting to me is to just see the form kind of messed with and played with in new ways. And I hope filmmakers continue to take up the challenge of musical films, because they are harder than regular films, but I think the rewards are so much greater.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think it's about fantasy right now in the musicals that are coming out. I think it is about authentic
catharsis.
You know, catharsis, exactly.
Expression and catharsis, absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you so much, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, take care.